there. That does that magic there. You can't see any of this. I'm just making sure
Yeah,
it works.
Paul's actually got a huge nerve centre of screens and all sorts of things. He lives in
Yeah,
a
but,
volcano.
yeah, I do live in the volcano. This is Arthur's Seat. I actually live in the bottom of Arthur's Seat in
That's what
Edinburgh.
it really is.
That's, brilliant. That's it. All working nicely. Okay, let's let folks in. It's not a huge crowd tonight, but I'm sure there'll be a great lot. Anyway, let's go. Here they come. So, okay.
Here we
Hello,
go.
everybody.
Oh, Russ brought a friend.
Yes, he's wearing sunglasses on his head. Right. Okay. Right. That's pretty well everybody just sort of settling in. Hello, folks. I'm just gonna.
I'm just
I'm
gonna,
Noel Chipley. I'm in charge of behind the scenes. I'm going to recede into the background shortly and introduce you to Mark Toner, who's going to be emceeing and looking after the show tonight. Mark, over to you.
well, thank you, Noel. So I'm as Noel says, I'm Mark Turner. I'm your MC for tonight. Noel and I are the sort of founding members of the Shoreline gang, and it's been great to be able to offer you some of what we do online. In fact, we can't actually do it live and be part of all these festivals in Edinburgh just now. It's a bit of a problem, but let's do the best we can. And tonight we're going to have a discussion between two writers about the surveillancing the future, and I'll be introducing them in a little minute. And but first of all, a bit of housekeeping. Those of you who are here on Zoom, your exits in case of emergency are your normal exits from your house or dwelling where you may happen to be. But we are live on this stream, and it's going out on YouTube and it's being live streamed onto the internet. So if you want some anonymity, just leave your video turned off, or if you want to show your face, that's fine. You can do that. So that's not a problem. The other thing is that we have to enjoy the experience best. Your view should be on the speaker view rather than the kind of grid view. So if you're just seeing a lot of windows at the moment, if you look up at the right of your window, change the speaker view. You'll then be able to see whoever's talking bigger than everybody else, and it's easier to follow what's going on. The other thing is we'll have the chat system running. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. And if you've got any questions, you can actually just type them into the chat as the evening progresses. And towards the end of the evening, we'll be looking through those. We'll pick out the more interesting questions, and you can either ask a question or I'll ask it for you. And Nailah and Chimedum will be able to pick that up, and we'll have a bit more of interactivity at that point. We also, if you like to sit and do your social media while you're doing this, we have our own hashtag and we have our own Twitter accounts. So I'll just pop them up there for you. So if you find the chat box, I've just put up the fact that our hashtag is #EventHorizon and our Twitter account is @ShoreInf. And if you tweet with those, then everything should all arrive together out on the internet for other people to see what's going on, and they may join us on YouTube as the evening continues. So I think that's all the general bits about how this is going to work. So I'm going to introduce our speakers now. So we have two writers. We have Nailah King, who's a writer whose work explores racism, discrimination, identity and her Caribbean heritage. She was the co-editor of Room magazine's first Women of Colour issue. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in The Field Zine, Guts magazine, The Humber Literary Review, Transition magazine and This magazine. She's a Canadian writer living in Edinburgh, and she's joined by Chimedum Ohaegbu, who attends the University of British Columbia in pursuit of hummingbirds and an English literature creative writing degree. That's an interesting combination. What do you think about that? She's Uncanny Magazine's managing editor, and her fiction debut was longlisted for the Nomo Award. Her work is in Strange Horizons and the Thames Review, among others. Find her at chimedum.com or at Chimedum Ohaegbu, and I'll put those up for you as well in case you want to follow those later on and make contact. So I'll pop those up for you. So that's our various links on there. So I'll pass you over to Nailah and Chimedum, and they'll talk deep thoughts, and we'll all listen and enjoy that. And as I said, put any questions you have up on the chat, and we'll pick them up at the end of the evening. Over to you two.
Thank you.
Cool. Excited to chat all about
Same
surveilling folks.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just launch with talking about, Nailah, how you approach it in your fiction, particularly in your short story, The Dissenters, if you want to talk a bit about that.
Sure. So I wrote a short story for a Canadian literary magazine called Guts. RIP. I miss them every day. Please support arts funding. It's a short story about a group of teens kind of fighting against surveillance culture, which, when I was thinking about this story, it ended up just being on the heels of, I'm not sure if everybody remembers this scandal, but those Ring doorbells and how they were installed in people's homes, and then there were voices that were talking to children and saying all these disgusting things, and controlling parts of homes. We've also heard about Alexas that have gone awry, Google Homes that have done kind of weird, nefarious things. So that was kind of the impetus for that. And obviously the intersection of, Black bodies being surveilled, violence against Black bodies, et cetera. So that's kind of where I was coming from the dissenter's perspective, just because I realized not everybody's read that story. I think that still is available. So maybe the archive's still available, I should say. So maybe I'll just add that to the chat if folks want to read it. But that's kind of
good. I would recommend it.
Thank you. It was stressful to write about because I'm not typically a sci-fi person. I feel like you need to know a lot about science. But I definitely felt like it was a story that I was kind of called to write. Just because it's tech sort of takes over, and we know that algorithms typically are prejudiced, and that tech, sectors and the people who actually write the algorithms are not representative of different cultures, ethnicities, genders, etc. So we know that kind of manifests in a really kind of nefarious way. So that's kind of the impetus of what made me want to write that story. But it was definitely challenging to write because, thinking about the more surveillance and the more we accept these tools into our homes and into our lives and how it, disproportionately affects certain folks. That's kind of why I felt called to tell that story.
Yeah, it's with surveillance, especially inviting it into our homes. It's a very intimate yet impersonal sort of thing. I find the friction between those two poles very interesting, and particularly with tech. When you talked about Alexa, I remember when you were telling me about the story in general, you were like, what if Alexa were racist? But that's also based on real life, because Alexa kind of already is. Especially it's listening to all of what people are talking about. It's misinterpreting accents to say specific things. And yeah, I guess for a very topical example of surveillance in the future or the present, because it's already happening, there's all this talk about the radicalization of young white boys online towards alt-right sort of sects, I guess. And one interesting thing that happened literally just this morning was Alexis Ohanian was talking about how oh no, all these young white boys are getting radicalized online, without really talking about, for context, Alexis Ohanian is Reddit's co-founder, I believe. So he didn't really talk about obviously his complicity in that sort of thing. What with the Reddit, I guess, sub forum that kind of supports Donald Trump, the Donald only being shut down this year. So I wanted to talk a bit about, and you don't have to have read The Dissenters in order to follow along with this, I guess, line of questioning. But there was something in The Dissenters which we can use as a launching point that I was really interested in. the main character, Marlo, kind of mentions like how she's the optimist of the group, as opposed to how she exists in this kind of dystopic world where like her heartbeat's being monitored, all of her movements are being watched, etc. So I wanted to talk a bit about how obviously like there's a lot of bias in technology, particularly towards racialized people. Oh, we have a question. Okay, I'll get back to that. So yeah, versus like that optimism around tech, kind of, I guess, a Black futurism versus the surveillancing futurism that we're kind of living in now. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I did have a conversation with someone who said that they will remain redacted for the purpose of this conversation, that we just shouldn't engage with that tech. And I think that mentality, while I definitely get the root and the value of that, I definitely think it's up to Black folks in particular to like engage with tech in a way that's conscious and productive and intersectional. And I think when I was thinking of Marlo didn't necessarily think that tech was, you know, pointless and that we should sort of divest of it and go back to some sort of like pre-tech reality, which is not realistic and I don't think possible, but rather like, I mean, the story's not that old, but it does feel like it was ahead of its time in the sense that, you know, re-envisioning systems, getting the right folks in the right room, creating the algorithms, like actually creating the collateral that builds systems, algorithms, etc. So I think that's what Marlo is coming from. And I guess the inherent belief that there kind of has to be a way out of this, like thinking that we'll be surveilled, tracked, monitored, policed forever is inherently dark and depressing to think about. So I do think in the scope of the dissenters and the scope of those teens, they did, like narratively, I needed somebody to not root for tech itself, but root for an alternative.
Yeah, like for the possibilities. Because I guess you can look at tech as like a, not necessarily a neutral ground. It could be more neutral than it currently is, I guess. But as it is, one thing that interested me early on in this conversation, you were like, oh, I'm not necessarily a sci-fi person. And yeah, that's an attitude that like I definitely empathize with, because obviously I like read lots and lots of sci-fi for my job, sci-fi, fantasy, etc. But yeah, I typically don't write it myself either. Like there's definitely a bit of a gap between like my enjoyment of sci-fi and my feeling that I'm able to be a creator of sci-fi, not just a consumer of it. And yeah, I feel like that ties into like the whole, is tech welcoming to minorities? We know it's not, sort of question.
We had like a side conversation about how like I would never want to, because there's gonna be some sci-fi bro will actually me to death, you know? And I just don't have the like knowledge of like science and tech to, you know, clap back to that. I think I would just do like a big groan and just like, you know, so that's like definitely the community of that, without generalizing, can be not as welcoming, because I think, I mean, again, we can name many books, but for the purpose of this discussion, they'll remain redacted, where like the fantasy's a little like, I don't know, like, I don't know that that's a thing that can happen, you know, or like if it's a long series, like book 8 contradicts the magic of book 1, but like it's all like one of my favorite memes. I pretend I do not see it, in a way that like
I am looking
fantasy, fantasy, you can get away with that stuff. I feel like, you know, I was talking about The Night Circus with someone, which is one of my favorites, and yeah, like that's a one where I'm like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
there's a couple moments where I'm like, I'm just not quite convinced, but I love it so much that I pretend I do not see it. But with sci-fi, and especially because, you know, I'm still coming around to the fact that, you know, W.E. Du Bois was a futurist, is like, like
right?
that is
Reading
still
the
to me,
comment,
like,
man.
I'm still coming around to the fact that like Black folks had been talking about futurisms forever. One of the first Black entrepreneurs was like a very like newly freed slave. Like we've been enterprising since the jump, but it's still kind of a mental reframing of like how we should be in those spaces. So when, even though I was super, super scared to write the dissenters, because again, I didn't want somebody to like, well, actual me to death on Twitter, because like, yeah, it happens all the time, which is why I rage quit Twitter. See you later. But I definitely think I'm interrogating like my perception of being able to be a sci-fi writer, because like whether we like it or not, like tech algorithms, etc., they're discriminatory. And I think like creating narratives around this will like help Black folks potentially see that they're part of this conversation as well, that we're welcome, that we have things to contribute. So that was kind of a big driver for kind of why I just kind of got over that like discomfort and fear around writing this. And I would still say to the inevitable sci-fi person who's like, well, actually, like, that's okay. Like, I'm okay with not being the most science fiction writer. Like, I'm cool. I know I'm not up for that sci-fi writing award. I'm okay with it. It's cool.
And the thing is, like, I feel like even no matter how much knowledge you have about like XYZ topic, eventually they're going to get to a point where they're just moving the goalposts so that you can never win. Like, you can have all the knowledge and all the patience in the world about like algorithms and how they harm like real life people, real life Black people, real life, etc. But like it's hard to win these arguments just based on talking to people, because they're already convinced by whatever social media they're constantly consuming, whatever like bubbles, so to speak, that they're in. Semi-related to that, I wanted to talk a bit about you rage quitting Twitter. Not like the reasons for it necessarily, but like for me, I find Twitter is it's a useful tool, definitely. And I would say for sure in some ways my life has been improved by it. I would say in others, not so much. And in terms of like surveillancing the future, I think Twitter is a really good example of like how Twitter and like lots of social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. They're great examples of how we're being surveilled in the present, because like they know a lot about us. Like, you type something in, you do a little tweet, and next thing you know, you're getting advertisements for whatever you tweeted about. I'm like, oh, I love birds. Do you want bird seed? That sort of thing. So I wanted to talk a bit about, I guess, the creation of like online avatars, online selves versus, so how much the state and technology companies take from you versus how much we give to them in pursuit of like being seen by our friends, by our coworkers, by people in our communities, that sort of thing.
I mean, without romanticizing Tumblr, which I feel like I have this discussion like every 2 weeks, I feel like we are in a time space of like the before internet days or the before SOCMED days and like the after, and or really like the live journal days.
Yeah.
I think before social media, people thought they wanted to live out loud. And I think Twitter used to be different. I mean, IG's a little cockroachy. Like, they keep adding new stuff, but it's ultimately the same. Whereas Twitter, I feel Twitter and Tumblr like really morphed into things that I don't recognize. And part of that is that sort of double-edged sword of like wanting community, particularly for BIPOC folks, because like suddenly we had a voice. that was really an important community, but the like infringement of, you know, when tech companies are like, we got a thing, we got to monetize the thing, we got to sell the thing.
Always.
I think that's, you know, the turning point. And I was talking to a friend about this, who was in Better Than IRL, which is a short story collection that's based out of Edinburgh. So everybody should pick that up. And she wrote an essay about it, talking about the before times, the Tumblr we know and love. And I finally cracked it, because again, it's one of my favorite talking points, is when Tumblr used to be great. And it was not so much that we didn't want to live out loud, but you could live out loud in silence.
Yeah.
In peace. You didn't have a reply guy.
Yeah.
Every time you wrote about enjoying something. And reply guy is not gendered in this sense, just like you didn't feel like there was a constant commentary on everything. It was getting to the point where I would just be like, oh, I really like potatoes today. And someone would come in with like what they thought was a hot take.
How dare you like potatoes? Rice is better, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And I think like it's chasing like something that like never really existed. This idea of being seen and unseen.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that never really existed. I mean, it did in the LiveJournal sense, because you could be online, but you could have a fully privatized account. So like when I had a LiveJournal, it was just me living out loud with my like 2 followers.
Yeah.
Posting Instagram lyrics, living my best life. And I think that's also the difference with surveillance cultures. People want to be able to like post pictures of their food and not be sold, you know, the latest product, and and be able to connect with folks in kind of a genuine way. But now there's all of this, you know, internal monologue to be like, if I post about these Cheetos, like, am I gonna get like 9 ads about Cheetos? And then my like mom will be like, why am I getting ads about Cheetos? Like it just becomes this like big bubbling effect. And then you have, it's just like this hyper consciousness, like, I don't know, like, I think.
Well, no, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was distracted by a comment. I think, I think social media, someone's kind of pointing out that it is elective, which is true. But I think it's part of a wider system. Like the intel used there is used to then create algorithms to tell Alexa to open Twitter or to like surface better tweets. Like it's all connected. And I think, to getting back to your original question, the reason why I've been kind of like backing off is because like I started to miss my like pre-internet life, which it's swimming pool syndrome. Once you pee in the pool, it's there. But I think like, just like harking back to something, but like, can you hark back to something that doesn't exist? And I think that's something that like I also tried to explore in the dissenters. Like they were trying to get away from these systems, and the solution was to like break the connection, but it meant that they couldn't connect with one another. So I think like that's ultimately like, how do we have connections and community without being watched? Or if you occupy certain bodies, how do you exist in a community without being policed? Because hashtags are being watched by law enforcement for protests, blah, 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 blah.
Being suppressed too.
And like Instagram is known to like not surface content from Black creators just in general, let alone if it's of a political nature. Like a lot of folks on TikTok weren't like being part of that algorithm. So I think it's all interconnected, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think, whether you choose to buy a device or not, like Google has a wealth. If you've ever searched for anything ever, like, I don't think there's any human being on the planet, unless it's an access issue, like, which potentially there is. But
yeah, which is on different end of the spectrum for sure.
Yeah, like, then if you've ever used search, they have that information. And obviously, like, the wealth of information is important, but I think, yeah, it's just putting folks in the position of always having to wonder, like, what's the net consequence of like staying informed or staying connected, or you know, what do I do when my data's already out there?
Exactly. Right, because like once the horse is out of the stable, it's gone. Like it's very hard to reel that back in. And I guess to be safe in general with the internet thing, like when you talked about how if you've searched anything on Google, it already has a slight idea of who you are, or at least who you are as a potential consumer. It's definitely related to like that concept of, oh, if a service is free, then you are the product. Like, because Twitter, for example, it's nothing without people tweeting all the time. Like, it's the users who are at the same time the creators and the consumers. And yeah, what you mentioned about like constantly reassessing whether or not to post this or that. I was going to ask about like self-surveillance in this context, because I definitely find like in terms of thinking of stuff like code switching around like certain authority figures, or just like changing the way I walk or what I'm looking at if I pass by a police car. Like nothing has happened to me yet in like specific, like in this specific example. I might just be walking down the street. They haven't done anything to me, but I'm still like, okay, I need to be careful. I need to like modulate my breathing. I need to walk a little looser, but like keep my head up. I need to like just be smiling. And this is all things that I'm technically doing to myself, like technically viewing myself from a third person observer, trying to assess my threat level to people who have weapons and like all kinds of institutional support. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about like self-surveillance. Would you say that it's gone up in this kind of time, and do you think it's going to keep on going up as we move on into a more surveillance friendly future?
I think people are in a space of being, well, I would say it's a dichotomy, you know, like some folks, typically BIPOC folks, but or underrepresented folks in general, we tend to be more reserved in terms of what we're posting. And I know like a lot of Black content creators have had their stuff stolen, monetized, made t-shirts of, they happen to be scrolling on H&M and they see their idea. So there's that bit of like being surveilled to produce capital in that sense. And then there's other folks or communities where they feel secure in what they're putting out. So, you know, they're constantly content creating. Like as someone who's, you know, an authorpreneur, I always get nervous about these live events because you never know who's going to come into the comments or ask you some wild question or, you know, have something to say. And that makes me really nervous to do a lot of live events. But I have people who don't experience that, like bewildered as to, you know, it's more exposure, it's more this, that, or whatever. But, you know, I think like there's fewer protections. So I think like self-surveillance with that, when you lack the security and safety, is like something that's just a product of being constantly watched, but watched to produce a reaction, to produce a product, to be capital. I think that's like a specifically like Black experience, without modelizing the experiences of Black folks, of course. But I think it's something that a lot of folks can relate to. And I'm always worried about that from like a writing standpoint, because I know that Faya does like write your, you know, one sentence work in progress. I don't always like, I don't know like who's screenshotting, copying and pasting, like doing whatever. And then is that going to end up on a t-shirt somewhere? So I'm always kind of thinking it from that perspective, and certainly from like safety. I mean, I think that's just how a lot of folks were raised, you know, you're in a retail space, you know, you're being watched. because I think that a theft is going to occur, or there's going to be the hyper awareness. That's something that's like ingrained in us, like, or at least I should say for myself, that's something that I carried since I was a small child, knowing that like you go into a store, someone's going to automatically be suspicious. You will not be believed if you maintain your innocence. Like all of those things are experiences that I've had since I was a kid. So it's definitely different than I thought it would be. Like, I thought I would be more conscious of it at this moment, but I'm still like, go to Primark, is it Primark? And I know that like some eagle-eyed person's like, you know, and sometimes I've walked in with like, I've got like, I know I'm buying my like $5 whatever. So I've just like got my one card and like, I don't know where they think I'm going to put stuff.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a purse, I don't have a bag.
Question. Like if you're surveilling us so hard, why is it not clear to you that we're not stealing? It's my question. But
yeah, like why is it puzzling? And then I was asked, you know, like, oh, like what's your deal? And I'm like, where am I putting this stuff? Like,
yeah.
So I think like that's part of it. And I think the technological part of it is, I think, you know, just, always kind of thinking about like, what's the net, not consequence, but like, what's the ripple effect of like posting this, you know, like, whether you're in some sort of a more like professional space, like every time I post on Instagram, I get very stressed because I'm like, am I coming across the way I would like to come across?
Yeah.
Like, you know, is my alt text accessible? So I'll listen to the screen reader. Like it's like a 35-minute process, you know, I just don't have it in me to just be like, you know, and I miss when I used to be like that, where I'm like, I'm going to write this live journal post, whatever, you know, but it was because I had the freedom to kind of like, post something and, you know, not like there was anything nefarious, but like I really felt like people needed to learn about those lyrics, you know, and how I felt about them. And I think now that I'm, you know, being watched all the time in a technical setting, where people just, you know, when you already feel like your life and the lives of folks in your community is being, you know, devalued because people are sharing these videos with wild abandon without context, without a content warning. I just think it's made me even more reluctant to post. But yeah, that was a very long-winded answer.
I think it was a good one. I definitely relate to like being told from childhood, like even the way I acted within the house was like a rehearsal for how I acted outside of it. Like, oh, don't do this or that so that you don't get used to doing this or that. And then you do it outside where we can't protect you in the same way. Like that is, there's not the same safety, obviously, in your home versus outside of it. And even sometimes there's not safety in like your home as a Black person. Like at any time, terrible things can happen. And even if like people are on your property, like it's not really your property, or at least in the eyes of the state, or like self-deputized watchers of grocery stores, that sort of thing. I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say like that, like, you know, the like barbecue Beckys of the world, like that's surveillance too. Like, you know, people being super concerned about, you know, what you're doing and where you're doing it in. There's like no like space. So when I think about the future, and we talked about this kind of in preparation for this, about, you know, we should just go to space. Is kind of the conceit of futurism. But I'm like, nah, there's gonna be, you know, somebody making, I don't know, something spacey and telling,
I mean, Elon Musk is trying to colonize it already, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that space, like, and like, that's kind of what we were talking about. Like, I always, and maybe this is why, like, sci-fi I struggle with, because, or rather, like, speculating about a future with the same systems in place is very challenging for me, because I'm like, well, it's just like here, but like your view is like planets. I don't know, I'd have to ask Elon, I guess, but you know, like what's the, I'm having a hard time understanding the conceit of that, and then the other sort of counter narrative that's going on in general, kind of Black speculations about like, what if like underwater, and I'm like, there's too many ghosts down there, I don't want to be down there. Like just like speculating on like where could we go.
Where can we go where we're not going to be constantly followed by somebody's white gaze? It's
like space doesn't work for me, the ocean doesn't work for me, though I guess we would be likely like there's some sort of not solace, but like potentially you could be connected with, you know, because there are sunken slave ships down there, we know that to be true. Like there is something intriguing to me about if you could go to the deep sea and not need like $1 million ship to do it, like what is that experience as, you know, the descendants ultimately of like transatlantic slave activity, like what would that be like if, you know, you could go down there. So that's like a curiosity gap, but I'm like, it's not space, it's potentially not the bottom of the ocean, so it's I wish we had a different word, like instead of speculations, like something else.
I mean, I guess the thing is like with Black futurism, how it differs from like, I'm gonna call it white futurism, is we're trying not to like replicate the systems that currently exist that got us, you know, here in the first place. Like my parents are immigrants from Nigeria, so in terms of the transatlantic slave trade, for example, like I don't have that same context that like the descendants would have, but it still affects me just in terms of like who is racialized as Black, that sort of thing. So I guess because I think we're almost out of time. I'm not 100% sure. Are we?
What is time?
That's a good question. What is space? What is time?
What is space? What is time?
Yeah.
In this essay, I will.
Just carry on. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. Well, since I kind of feel like we're out of time, I'm going to end on a slightly more fun question and related to what I've been babbling about just now, which is like what systems would you like to see enacted that will like make futurism more inclusive, more built upon decolonial structures of care, that sort of thing? Like,
I mean,
how would you like to see futurism go, essentially?
Well, you read The Dissenters. It went great. I kid. It went terribly.
It did not go great.
It did not go great. If I had to be paid to make a happy ending, I could not do it. I don't do that. That's not my brand. What I would say is some sort of community that's obviously not harmful. I'm speaking in kind of broad vagueness because I'm still thinking about it, frankly, because I know that like space and the sea don't work. I guess obviously like not being policed is my biggest like, and I'm not necessarily specifically talking about law enforcement, like just not having to feel like I need to change my tone of voice, I need to have relaxed hair, I need to look a certain way, like policed in all the various sense of the word. I think that's kind of a system I would like to see go away. And then I guess just like certain hierarchies, like it frustrates me that I only learned about W.E. Du Bois being a futurist. Like I know that he's an abolitionist, but like everything being tied to like activism versus like creation or a specific type of creation. So definitely obviously decolonizing a sci-fi canon, if you will.
Yes.
And then I guess like more conversations around, well, this is like very kind of Caribbean, but you know, again, I only recently learned that slave ships also went to Colombia, which, because my parents are Caribbean, is potentially a more likely tie So like where's like South America's kind of role in my personal history, but just also part of the conversation in general. So I guess just like more clarity, honesty, transparency around like these journeys, but also it's something like to explore. Anytime I like read about these things, it's because, you know, one person has decided to take on this bit of research. So yeah, some sort of like way to control certain narratives, certain histories. So I don't have to like be so gaspy when I find out like facts that are like right there in front of me, but through various systemic reasons on, you know, controlling the narrative. There's lots of things that like many Black folks, myself included, are just learning now. Like, you know, that there's lots of streets in Toronto that are called Dundas, which is tied to Henry Dundas in Scotland. And he may or may not have, you know, built slave ships in the Maritimes of Canada. I didn't know that.
Huh, I didn't know that. No, just found that out now.
Yeah, facts, right? Just things that we don't know, especially since like I'm exploring like seafaring narratives. Like that's a thing that I should know. So yeah, just having like the whole narrative that's not like a burden on like someone who happens to take an interest, like some sort of way to like disrupt common narrative to build a wider narrative so we can write, I don't want to say more nuanced stories, but like different perspectives on what we're speculating on. Because that's always my question when people say you're a Black speculative writer. I'm like, that's news to me. I don't know what I'm speculating on. But yeah, just like that kind of, those steps to me, I think, at least from like a fiction perspective, like potentially could be allow the community to write different types of narratives, and maybe not feel like I do, where I always ask myself, you know, do I have any business? You know, that was a big question. Like, do I have any business writing the Dissenters in terms of like, this is a sci-fi narrative? So I think like not feeling like you have to occupy certain bodies or narratives, and then just having that wide breadth of knowledge. Because I know there's obviously like a big canon in terms of speculative, but I mean like that historical knowledge to be able to like trace from like the past, the future. I think that's why I struggle with the sci-fi. How can I speculate when I dubiously know like the past?
Exactly. Yes. Literally that. Like that's why, you know, when the 1 month of the year, Black History Month, where I like the modern, I guess, reconceptualization of it as like, modern to me. Maybe it was earlier than I thought, but like it's both Black History Month, but also Black Futures Month. Like it's both of these things at the same time. And like Black History Month, it's really all year round. Like it's the whole year and etc. But yeah, like how are we gonna know where we're going if where we've been has been purposefully obfuscated? Like it's a question that I also struggle with. But yeah, thank you for your answer. I think we're out of time. I'm not super sure.
That's just a nice place to bring it to a halt there. I think that's good. What a fascinating discussion. I mean, a lot of this is ringing all sorts of bells with me because as a person of a language that is not exactly English, I find an awful lot of the technology unusable because it assumes things about who's using it. But the deeper the ideas you brought in about surveillancing in terms of racial sort of issues, that's something that I'm really finding very interesting, and it's not something I'd really seen in depth to that extent before, as to why one kind of surveillancing triggers memories of another one, and that's been very fascinating to follow that. Are you both ready for some questions? We can have a look and see.
Yeah.
Sure.
I had some running up the chat here, which have been looking interesting. And if I have a wee look, the first one we got was from Russell Jones, who we know. Russell, do you want to ask you a question? Or yep, here he comes.
Okay. Yeah. I actually think you've sort of answered my first one. So I wonder if I could ask my second one, which I think you partially answered too. And I apologize if it's really broad. But I wondered if you thought overall kind of the human race or the human species was better off or worse off because of technology, and kind of how you felt about that in your own lives too.
I can start. Okay, I guess for me, I would say, and again, this is a blanket statement, but I would say better off. Like, in terms of treating things like medical issues, increasing like accessibility tools, um, like technology has been a real, like I wear glasses for a reason. These aren't just aesthetic. And that's a type of technology that has been very useful in my life. Likewise with like asthma medication and the ways in which you can administer it, it's definitely changed from like before I was a kid to now. So I would say in some ways, yeah, definitely. Especially from the accessibility slash medicinal viewpoint. In terms of war technology, no. I'm not a military historian, so I can't speak to like a really deep point in terms of how much should we advance military technology. But I feel like getting better at killing people is definitely not a goal that we should have had as a species. And again, that's very general because there are particular groups that have had, I guess, more of a intense hand in using technologies to harm other groups, for example. So that's my answer.
I mean, for me, I don't know that it's possible to divest fully from technology. I think it's just having more nuanced conversations of who does this harm, who does it exclude, why does it exist, particularly when you're talking about folks as capital or intellectual whatever. Like, I just don't think folks are asking enough questions. You know, I previously worked in a more techie environment, and the conversation always went, oh, if we do this thing, we can get this information. There's no like, but like, there's no narrative around that. So I think for me, it's, you know, I'm sure there's folks who are unequivocal and say, no, tech can do no good. But I think it is worth exploring a more inquisitive technological process, you know, and also not bringing together developers who are all the same, you know, like no wonder there are Netflix algorithms that don't promote shows from different types of folks because it's the same type of person writing that algorithm. And then to say, oh, well, this show didn't do well because the algorithm writers are not representative of the society as a whole. So for me, diversifying who's coding is definitely part of that. And, you know, asking more questions. I think it's a Jurassic Park quote. You didn't ask if you asked if you could, you didn't ask if you should.
I literally wrote that down, like, look at us.
Look at us.
Well, thank you for that. We've got a lot of questions also from Anne Suis. Anne, do you want to come on and ask one or all or whatever question you would like to? Yeah, thank you, Anne. Do you want to join in?
I think pretty much my comments have been addressed both in the discussion and just now in your final bit there. So I'm not sure I can think of anything new. But unless you want to sort of, I can read it out to see. I was saying even in Twitter,
let's go for it. Yeah.
Even in Twitter is a choice to publicly engage, but things like Alexa, I think people aren't making that choice. They're being listened to, and then that information is being used without them even knowing about it. So I saw it slightly different, but I was very interested in your response to that you addressed in your discussion.
I mean, I think that's a fair point. I think it's tricky because, you know, I remember the first time I was presented with the terms of service. I had gotten an iPod for the first time.
Aw.
And I had actually read the terms of service.
Wow.
And that is the last time I had read the terms of service. And I think the reality is it is a horrible document. It's not plain language. It's rarely translated. And so people aren't engaging with it. And, I was horrified to learn the things that are in the Facebook terms of service. So I definitely think that they're both doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. But to your point, I don't know that, Alexa adjacent products are going out of their way to be transparent about what the technologies actually do. And the instances where really nefarious things have happened. They're real quick to squash that down. There's a plain language movement in law, but there's not a plain language movement in terms of, technologies and how to use them. And I think, I hope that, folks are going to start pushing back to say, I'm not going to read your 16-page document about all the information you're going to steal. I need you to tell me in terms and, in terms and in a length that is palpable, what's going to happen. So I think to your point, there needs to be transparency, far more transparency in terms of the Alexa, Google Home products, because they're not being transparent. They're just sort of pushing benefits and they're not surfacing what they have access to.
Which addresses my second point, which is I feel that people don't really know what's happening. And we can't really. I've tried to read these things as well, and it's pretty much impossible. But we're kind of, to be in this modern world in the way it is, you kind of, forced. Otherwise, you're sort of really, I don't know, taking yourself out of what's happening around you right now, to not be engaged in it. And I think particularly if you're in the arts and things, I'm not sure it's possible for you now. I mean, my daughter was an artist for a while. She's changed her focus, but one of the prerequisites was to be part of social media and engaged in that, and being prepared to give artists talk about her work. All the things she didn't want to do, she just wanted to get on with her work. Yeah. So I think it's very difficult in the arts not to be engaged with all of this, and maybe pretty much most areas of life. Because it's there, it's very difficult to step back from it. So I agree that I really think that we have to hold these companies more to account, and people need to be more aware of it and more questioning. I think that's what I said. Most people are a problem with they're not really being engaged with that, not understanding the implications, and so companies are getting away with it. Was the last bit I will. Yeah, so I think you've pretty much addressed what I was questioning, and I agree too that I don't think going to space is any answer for anything. We need to look after here and now, our environment and our social issues, or they're just going to follow.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any last comments, Nailah and Chimedum? I think we're just coming towards the end of our evening. I'll leave it to you give you a couple of minutes. You want to finish off?
I'm trying to think if there's anything that we missed or we wanted to explore more.
I guess maybe I should say something that's not all doom and gloom about Twitter, because in a lot of ways the internet is, at least in its early conception, everyone hoped it would be a kind of democratizing force, where merit would fly to the top, and everyone has an opportunity, there's less gatekeepers, etc. And I still think that if we do a lot of work and a lot of thinking, we could probably get to that point. Because definitely, I think with the internet, a lot more marginalized creators are able, to leave the margins. It's harder for systems of power to push us back into the margins when we can self-publish, we can have a very I was gonna say ludicrous, I don't think that's the right word, a very I guess, fruitful, like Twitter or Instagram, etc. presence. I know activists who do a lot of like Twitter activism, which is real life activism. Like the internet is real life because internet harassment is still going to affect you in real life as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not all doom and gloom, but it can easily become all doom and gloom if we don't work towards a more equitable internet that centers the decentered, I guess, to play off your story title.
Yeah, I would say that like it's hard for me to really bash it because to Anne's point, it is kind of the way things are going, and a lot of productive communities have, you know, blossomed from, you know, Twitter because, you know, folks weren't able to be heard. I think it's just a matter of being more mindful about what we're doing online, certainly, but also kind of reimagining IRL offline community too. Like, I think I'm loath to imagine a non face-to-face in-person community because some folks do need those touch points. So I think with everything that's gone on with the pandy and everything else, like I think we just need to like think more about the systems we've created and how we're engaging folks, and who does it serve, who does it exclude, why are we doing it? 3 whys.
Hell yeah.
Good advice. Keep asking questions. Don't just grab the latest thing. Yeah. And those of us who want to make the internet a good place have
Mark, did you freeze?
Working for it. Yeah.
Not for me.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting and entertaining evening. Thanks for all your contributions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody who's come along and the questioners. That was great. So I'll just run through the thanks. We have lots of people that actually we have some important people who made this happen. First of all, our speakers. Do you know what's just happened? Ask Siri decided to jump in here. It's definitely after me. So I'll just thank Nailah King and Chimedum Ohaegbu, our speakers, for a very entertaining, very interesting evening. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, Creative Scotland, who've made it possible for us to do these online events this year. Also, Shoreline of Infinity, which is the organisation which is putting these on. And Noel on his technical experience in the background there, and you, the audience, for coming along. Next time, there's a bit of a September break, so next time will be the 15th of October, I think, unless there's something else slipped in. We're going to have Ellie Percy Calderwood and Rhiannon Grist doing an interview, and at the end of October there'll be an event Horizon about video gaming, so we're trying to keep a variety going with these things. So thank you very much. If anybody wants to just sort of hang about and have a little bit of a chat at the end, that's fine. That's the end of our event, and
awesome.
Unless no one wants to say something.
No, I think we're good. Oh, and thanks to everyone who came out.
Yes, thank you. This was super fun.
Or logged on. That's not the case.
Right.
Thanks to Mark for hosting this as well. Well done, Mark.
Yes, thank you.
It's easy. I just say, we got people going to talk. You just say, right, on you go. And
yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. So thank you everyone for coming along. If you want to hang around for the last few minutes, that's fine. But do come along to SeanandInfinity.com and see what we're all about. So thanks for coming.
That was a good session. I learned a lot about that, and lots of things chimed with experiences as well. Thanks very much for.
I really enjoyed that. Always fun to talk to you, Nailah.
But when you started mentioning, what was it, algorithms and these sort of ways of doing things, it just immediately reminded me of the nations of the UK and the mess they were in over